The Klingons, one of my favorite science fiction races ever presented on screen, and also a fan favorite for decades within the Star Trek fandom. The Klingons represent very human concepts like honor, battle prowess, dedication to one's personal beliefs, and not only fighting against impossible odds, but seeking out those odds as a point of personal pride. The Klingons push forward constantly, testing their limits and their skills to better themselves in a lifelong struggle to find a place among the honored dead. Having in legend slain their own gods for they were more trouble than they were worth, Klingons look to themselves to be worthy of an afterlife, counting each action they take as a measure of their own self-worth. The fictional race from the planet Kronos has inspired cosplay and fan fiction, as well as the creation of an actual camp where one can learn how to live and speak Klingonese. A race that many can identify with through the medium of science fiction has had a long evolution since their introduction into pop culture from their first appearance in Errand of Mercy 1967 on Star Trek, the original series. How long an evolution? Well, they went from this to this to this. The most recent re-envisionment of the Klingons is a hot-button issue among Star Trek fans, and honestly the reason for this video. But in order to understand why there is a divide between most older Trekkies or Trekkers and the newer fans or Drekkies, we have to take a look at how the Klingons were introduced, how they evolved within canon, and how they are now portrayed on CBS's 2018 series Star Trek Discovery. Let's take a jaunt through the pages of Trek history where facts don't give a damn about your feelings. As explained on Wiki, developed by screenwriter Gene L. Coon in 1967 for the original Star Trek series, Klingons were swarthy humanoids characterized by prideful ruthlessness and brutality. Totalitarian, and with a martial society relying on slave labor, they reflected analogies with both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. They first appeared in Star Trek episode Errand of Mercy 1967, where they were named after Lieutenant Wilbur Klingon, who served with the Star Trek creator, Gene Roddenberry, in the Los Angeles Police Department. Klingons were typically portrayed with bronze skin and facial hair suggestive of Asian people, and possessed physical abilities similar to humans. The swarthy look of the Klingon males was created with the application of shoe polish and long, thin mustaches. Budget constraints limited creativity. Costume designer for Star Trek, Bill Theus, created the look for various aliens, including the Klingons. The Klingons took on the role of the Soviet Union, with the fictional government, the United Federation of Planets, playing the role of the United States. As such, they were generally portrayed as inferior to the crew of the Enterprise. While occasionally capable of honor, overall, they were shown without redeeming qualities, brutish, scheming, and murderous. Klingons became the primary antagonists of the Enterprise crew, in part because the makeup necessary to make other alien races, like the Romulans, was too time-consuming and costly. The first evolution of the Klingons after TOS was portrayed in Star Trek the Motion Picture, released in 1979. These Klingons were depicted with rigid foreheads, snaggled and prominent teeth, and a defined language and alphabet. The production designer Lee Cole used red gels and primitive shapes in the design of the Klingon consoles and ship interiors, to give the crafts a dark and moody atmosphere. The alphabet was designed as angular, with sharp edges hearkening to the Klingons' militaristic focus. Costume designer Robert Fletcher created new uniforms for the Klingons, reminiscent of feudal Japanese armor, with the intent to give the impression of the culture's ideals of the sacred emperor, the warlord, and others. Star Trek III: The Search for Spock, released in 1984, gave us the next change in how this fictional race was evolving on screen. The heavy, cragged head ridges of the motion picture were redesigned and made less pronounced. Costume designer Robert Fletcher from the motion picture was brought on, creating new costumes retaining the air of feudal Japanese design. He believed it was an important part of the Klingon authoritarian attitude. The lead Klingon, Captain Kruge, was played by actor Christopher Lloyd, along with John Larroquette as Klingon officer Maltz. We also got our first view of Kronos' fauna in Kruge's pet, Tard. What a cute puppy. Kruge was our first real look at the changes in behavior made to the next generation of Klingons. If you caught that pun, Qapla'. Kruge was a character looking to elevate his position within the Empire by increasing his personal list of victories. Bringing home the head of respected and well-known Klingon rival, Captain James Tiberius Kirk of the United States Starship Enterprise, would have been enough to give him a certain godlike status. But he also sought the secrets of the Genesis Project, which could be used as a weapon to end worlds and bring the United Federation of Planets to its knees, something the Klingon Empire had failed to do in their first war with the Federation. Crud showed previous attributes already established in TOS canon, like brutality, but he also expanded upon the lore by showing us that Klingons were capable of reading a combat situation intuitively, displaying an ambition that relied more on battle prowess than the odds, and the personal need to attain honor for the Empire as well as the self. In my opinion, this wonderful portrayal by Christopher Lloyd established the core characteristics of the Klingons up until Star Trek Discovery. In Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, we were introduced to another aspect of Klingon society. Actor John Schuck portrayed Ambassador Kamarag in both this film and Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. John was a reoccurring actor in the franchise who played several parts, including another Klingon called Antak in Star Trek Enterprise episode Affliction and Divergence. This time we got the understanding that the Klingons actually cared about diplomacy in some fashion. Kamarag was a representative of the Empire to the Federation, and though displaying a forceful personality as per the norm in Klingon canon thus far, he was much more reserved than his warrior counterparts. His objection to how the Federation was handling a sensitive matter to the Empire, such as losing once again in a battle to Captain Kirk, could have started another war. Though he threatened, there will be no peace as long as Kirk lives. This showed the viewers that, although obtuse, Kamarag was an intelligent, dynamic diplomat who maneuvered using circumstance as well as the weight of the Klingon Empire. This also gave the impression that there were more than one kind of warrior within the race, that battles to the Klingons were more than just hand-to-hand or ship-to-ship combat. Kamarag, in 4 and 6, showed that his weapon of choice was his mind. Now, I'm not skipping over Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. I understand that it's not considered canon, but I still like most of it. There wasn't much in the way of changes to the Klingons in this film, with one very notable exception. Actress Spice Williams-Crosby played Lieutenant Vixis under Todd Bryant's Klingon Captain Claw. We had seen Klingon women in TOS. Vixis showed us, indeed, women were able to hold rank, respect, and seek honor in combat within the Klingon military, the extent of which was not explained, but having a female officer on the bridge of the Bird of Prey for the first time gave the viewers the impression that Klingon women were not a secondary class. They were indeed shown respect when able to demonstrate personal strength and combat prowess. In Star Trek VI, we were shown even more diverse aspects of Klingon society. It gave us a look at TOS crew members meeting the Chancellor of the Klingon High Council, Gorkin, played by another recurring actor in Star Trek, David Warner. Here we met a Klingon the likes of which we had never seen. Chancellor Gorkin was a true leader and diplomat, a Klingon that cared about his people, their heritage, and their future. A true culture warrior that did not need to disrespect or devalue any other race's beliefs in order to elevate or respect his own. This dynamic character was without a doubt one of the most enlightening as to the vast points of view that Klingon race could possess. He brought words like charming and reserved into the vernacular of a fictional species that had been more related to terms like ruthlessness and battle crazed for the first time on the big screen. Though the character was short-lived, the impression he left lasted for years to come. The other notable character in this film was played by veteran actor Christopher Plummer as General Chang, the one-eyed Klingon who serves as Gorkin's chief of staff. Chang appeared like a transition between the older TOS representations of Klingons and the newer cinematic versions. He had head ridges, but hardly a bone plate. This suggested at the time that he was possibly some offshoot like TOS Klingons, or they were expanding the physical differences in the Klingon races. It wasn't until Star Trek Enterprise that episodic viewers received a more in-depth explanation as to why. With somber respect, I must also note that Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry died shortly before this movie's premiere, just days after viewing the film himself. Gene's creativity and spirit would live on for decades to come through the beloved universe that he created, through those that had the pleasure to work with him and those that he loved. Thank you, Gene. Second star to the right, and straight on till morning. With the release of Star Trek The Next Generation, or as the fans lovingly call it, TNG, we were introduced to the first steady Klingon character who spanned not one but two Star Trek series. Actor Michael Dorn portrayed Lieutenant Worf, son of Mo, for the entire run of TNG and 4 seasons of Deep Space Nine. As well as playing Worf in several TNG movies, he was also able to play Worf's grandfather, also called Worf, in Star Trek VI. Worf is an unusual case when it comes to Klingons. He was raised by humans after his parents were killed when he was very young. The racial bigotry between the Klingon Empire and the Federation still existed to a degree in his youth. He felt isolated and tried to honor his heritage by gathering whatever information he could find on his race. His isolation was further compounded by the unjust accusation that his father was a traitor, which did not allow him to return to Kronos when he came of age. In his society, being the son of a traitor, he could not acquire honor, and he would always be considered an outsider as well as a second-class citizen. Worf's only choice to find personal honor in his life as a warrior was to join Starfleet, the historical adversary of his own people, even under the Mutual Protection Pact of the Khitomer Accords. The journey we take with Worf through his character's development gives the viewer an insight into the Klingon culture through the eyes of a Klingon brought up in 23rd century human values. These insights allow the viewer to explore and try to understand Klingon culture through his vaguely familiar lens. As Worf learns more about himself, his place within his own racial culture, fans are able to go into great detail through several aspects of culture of this fictional race. With all that can be said about Worf, he is not a perfect example of what Klingon culture is, as many of his Klingon friends that he makes along the way have stated to him many times that he does not understand his own people. Worf is one of my favorite characters in Star Trek, but even I have to admit these points. A more accurate representation of the television incarnation of the Klingon peoples would be Worf's brother Kurn, son of Mo, played by Tony Dodd, another reoccurring actor in the Star Trek universe. Kurn was saved after the murder of his parents, raised by a family friend, Lord, under the impression that he was Lord's son. When Kurn discovered the truth about his ancestry, honor compelled him to seek out his brother and clear their family name. Kurn would not have been able to live with himself as a warrior without recognizing the truth of who he was as honor demanded, as well as regaining the honor of his father's name. Lies do not become Klingons with honor. Kurn teaches us that what we do in life echoes in the afterlife. A Klingon without honor is no Klingon at all. Klingons do not manipulate, live with untruths, misrepresent themselves, or seek power through means that would compromise their honor. A perfect representation of what is not acceptable in Klingon society is Duras, son of Toral, played by Daniel Royden. Duras was a member of the Klingon High Council. His father is the traitor for which the crimes of Moog were falsely accused. Duras knew of his father's treachery and took steps to use his family's power and influence within the Empire to hide these facts. Even Chancellor Kempek of the High Council knew of this falsehood and remained silent on the issue, for if the Chancellor had chosen to reveal the truth, Duras would have called him a liar and begun a civil war. The difference between a Klingon with honor and one without can be seen when Worf and Kurn uncover this plot, and at the behest of the Chancellor also choose to remain silent to keep the Empire from falling into civil war. This story arc shows us, even within the Klingon Empire, there are true villains who have no respect for one of the highest qualities in post-TOS Klingon canon. Other Klingon characters that further flushed out this fictional culture are Chancellor Gowron, portrayed by Robert O'Reilly, Martok, son of Uthog, played by actor J.G. Hetzler, another of my favorite actors who played several roles in the Star Trek universe. Also, Susie Plaxton, who portrayed Ambassador Kalar, a half-human, half-Klingon, as well as being a recurring actor in several other Star Trek series. Another of my favorite Klingons is Grilka, leader of the House Grilka, played by Mary Kay Adams. The difference between the original Klingons of TOS and the Klingons of Star Trek the Motion Picture and beyond are a simple matter of budget and availability in TOS and creative license, better prosthetics, and the advancement of available cosmetics. For the Star Trek fandom and the creators working behind the scenes, this was not enough. The pilot episode of Star Trek Enterprise Broken Bow was set just 100 years before TOS, and we met a Klingon who had crash-landed on Earth. This Klingon, named Klang, played by Tommy Lister Jr., is the first one of his race seen by humans. He has the now traditional look of Star Trek III's Klingons. This created a conundrum of continuity, one that fans needed to have answered. According to the website Fandom, in 2154, Klingon scientists working under the direction of Antak recovered several augment embryos from a hijacked bird of prey destroyed in orbit in the Kovat colony during the augment crisis. Fearing that humans could overwhelm the Empire if they moved to staffing their ships with augments, a project was set up in an attempt to create their own augments to counter this perceived threat. The effort failed dreadfully. These augments created did develop enhanced strength and intelligence, but they also began to show human characteristics, from the blatant to the subtle. These included personality alterations and a loss of the characteristic forehead ridges. Ultimately, the subjects died agonizing deaths when the incompatible DNA resulted in neural system breakdown. This process, when introduced to subjects who had Levodian flu, became an epidemic that threatened the Klingon race with extinction. Eventually, a cure was found and stabilized the process in its early stages, after the cranial ridges had dissolved and some minor neural reordering had occurred. Eventually, a process was developed to reverse the damages to the Klingon appearance, reverting them back to a more traditional, at least in post-Star Trek the Motion Picture physiology. This can be seen in the fact that again we have returning actors to play older versions of themselves, such as William Campbell as Koloth, John Colicos as Kor, and Michael Ansara as Kang. Star Trek TOS was kept alive by the fans that wouldn't let this television show die. It is estimated that NBC received over 1 million letters in its second season, begging NBC to keep the show from cancellation. When it was eventually canceled after its third season, the show was kept alive through syndication well into the 1980s. Star Trek conventions were the predecessor to that of Star Wars conventions. Cosplayers dressed as their favorite characters, traded Star Trek memorabilia, and kept the universe alive until Paramount finally began making motion pictures starring the original cast. In movies and in television shows, this dedication spread from fandom to productions, as reoccurring writers, makeup artists, producers, directors, costume designers, and actors showed up again and again when called to work on a Star Trek project. This was a family that bridged between the beloved actors who played some of our favorite roles, the people that helped create them, and the fandom. Now for the last. Star Trek Discovery premiered on September 19, 2017, for CBS All Access to mixed reviews from fans. It was the first Star Trek show the fandom had received since 2005. Starring a diverse cast, including, in my humble opinion, such wonderful actor as Doug Jones, the series star is a single actor, Sonequa Martin Green, as lead Michael Burnham. Unlike all other Star Trek shows before it, the main focus of the series is not on the captain or equally spread out among the fellow crew members, but on Michael Burnham herself. Discovery explores the Federation Klingon War while following the crew of the USS Discovery, though through most of the first season there is almost nothing to do with the actual battles, skirmishes, or diplomacy during this important era of Star Trek lore, an era that shaped the Xenoracist views that most of the characters from TOS had, due to the events that had taken place then. Set in a time that had been so worked and reworked by several of the past movies and television shows, many fans were upset that this war had not been given more significance within the series. That aside, the creators of Discovery aimed to create a new, fresh look for the Klingon race, one that showed from the very start of the series, as if plucked from another franchise or universe, the representation of Klingons in both culture and appearance was vastly different from that of the Star Trek motion picture to Star Trek Enterprise era of movies and television. The first major discrepancy in canon, and as far as culture, comes from the lead Klingon ship Sarcophagus in the very first episode. It is covered in coffins of Klingon dead, where in previous Trek, it had always been well established that once a soul leaves the Klingon body, that body then becomes worthless. There is a tradition to watch over a body on the first night of its death to keep predators away, but this ritual is rarely observed, and in most cases, the body is just simply destroyed. During the time of Discovery, 10 years before TOS, the augment virus is still prominent within the Klingon race. Not only is this completely ignored, but the physical characteristics of the Klingons are almost completely alien, as well as their attire. There could have been an argument as to the stark changes in attitude and traits within these Klingons had acknowledgement of the virus been utilized within the story. There was little emphasis on the Klingon High Council or the interrelationships between the great houses that traditionally ruled the Council. In Enterprise, second episode, set 90 plus years before Discovery, Captain Jonathan Archer is the first human to enter the Klingon High Council chambers. There we see its members and its cultural response from the Klingons that are familiar enough to understand that they are members of a race set 100 years before TOS. In the first episode of Discovery, we see a complete division within the ruling families. No real cause is given to explain this discrepancy, which was again confusing to longtime Star Trek fans who were grasping to understand the creative direction of the series. I don't necessarily believe the fandom were expecting to see Hun-looking augments wearing gold sashes showing signs of brutality and cowardice, but the stark difference in representation of one of the fandom's favorite alien races was hard to ignore. After a confusing introduction, and several episodes in which there were no direct relevance to the Klingon Federation War, we finally set upon the apparent main Klingon antagonist, L'Rell, played by Mary Sheffield. Hope I didn't butcher that name. Sorry, Mary. L'Rell was the captain of a D7 class ship. This ship served as a prison vessel. Among her many duties, she was an interrogator and torturer. Her prisoners included Harry Mudd and Ash Tyler. According to Tyler, L'Rell had taken an interest in it, something which Tyler forced himself to utilize in order to stay alive, leading her to engage in a non-consensual sex with a human. I don't believe non-consensual sex has ever been a trait with the Klingons. This, again, is not the only discrepancy within fictional Klingon culture. After Michael Burnham convinced the mirror universe counterpart of Philippa Georgiou to give up control of the hydro bomb she had planted deep within a volcano on Kronos, Burnham gave the detonator to L'Rell. Burnham and Tyler convinced L'Rell to use the detonator to force the Klingon High Counselor to accept her as their new leader. In a speech to the Council, L'Rell gave them a choice to accept her leadership and end the war against the Federation, or she would detonate the hydro bomb, destroying Kronos. Acceding to her demands, Klingon forces broke off their attack on Sector 001 and returned to Klingon space, bringing an end to the war. This, in and of itself, is a complete disregard of all previous Star Trek canon in regards to the Klingon Empire. As stated before, through the evolution of canon, there are certain characteristics that define the Klingon race. Though the augment Klingons did take on certain undesirable human traits, the core culture of the Empire relied heavily on its self-identification within the realm of honor. When Duras hid his family's betrayal, biding time and consolidating power before assassinating Chancellor Kempek, Duras knew that if the ruling families of the High Council were to find out about his dishonor, he would have been put to death. When Gowron ascended to power over Duras, had Duras broken with tradition, the Empire would have fallen into civil war. This is because such an act would have been considered a great dishonor by those not in debt to his house, or who stood a chance to gain more lands and power by his ascension. When the Duras sisters decided to push forth Duras' son to lead the Empire over Gowron, who had less in the way of financial support than the House of Duras, it plunged the Empire into civil war. When the government records concerning Duras' father's betrayal were unsealed, many great houses sided with Gowron because of the dishonor the House of Duras had shown by siding with an enemy that had gotten many Klingons killed. In relation to honor, the actions you take in this life echo into the next. These actions are what gets you into the Klingon heaven, Stovo Kor. The odds, or what you are up against, does not matter. What matters is whether or not the actions a Klingon takes are honorable. The House of Duras fought from a position of financial power, with no care as to how that power was gained. They fought without honor, and lost time and time again. Gowron, with less financial support and less warriors, won the war because he fought with honor, and those beneath him seeing this felt more passionate when raising their banners in battle. L'Rell used terrorist tactics in order to force the great houses of the Klingon Empire to bend the knee. She threatened men, women, children, the elderly, and the infirm. Every plain, mountain, forest, swamp on Kronos, and every living thing, be it flora and fauna, she threatened to destroy. Every ancient battleground, to the unmarked grave of Kahless, would be utterly annihilated. The entire history of the Klingons. Gone. All for power, all for control. We are expected to believe that at no point did such a dishonorable act find its way to a bat'leth. At no point did a single Klingon take any advantage to kill L'Rell and restore honor to the Empire. She simply cowed an entire race after such a dishonorable threat. That not a single warrior with songs of great deeds filling their soul, begging to avenge such a cowardly act, would not gladly exclaim, "Today is a good day to die." A Klingon would rather die than live as a prisoner. A Klingon would rather die than live in fear. A Klingon would take his or her own life if there was no chance to restore their honor. This is the Klingon way. This is just one reason why lifelong Star Trek fans have such a problem accepting Star Trek Discovery. It's foreign. It doesn't feel, act, or sound like Star Trek. I give respect to the creators of this series that wanted to try something new. It's always a challenge when trying to do something fresh and make it exciting when there are so many expectations already built into a franchise. I understand this, but the fact is, it has the name, but not the dedication to fans and past creators that makes Star Trek so enduring. It's been and always been dedication to the lore, the creators, and the fans that has made Star Trek one of the most beloved franchises that it is today. In my opinion, this could all be fixed by listening to longtime fans, bringing in some previous Star Trek creators, and a quick call to John Delancey. This could all be fixed with one cue snap. This is Lodonis from Facts and Feelings reminding you to like, comment, and subscribe. And of course, please remember, be good to each other.